Hi everyone, welcome to another live Q&A with the Yorkshire Coronavirus Business Support Group. So Jonny and I set up the group with the goal of supporting Yorkshire businesses throughout the crisis, and today we have a very, very special guest with us, Mr. Ed Miliband, the newly appointed Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So thank you for taking the time out of your crazy busy schedule to talk to us. We've got almost 500 businesses represented in the group, and we're all eager to get your thoughts on the current crisis. But first things first, congratulations on being back on the front bench. How does it feel to be back?
Well, it's good to be back. It's important to be back at this time, I think, Nikki, because it's a time when the country's obviously going through a massive national crisis. And so many businesses, and this is particularly why my area of work is important, so many businesses are facing such distress, including in Yorkshire. And I congratulate you, by the way, on having set up this support group, because I think it's so important and so necessary. And so my brief is important for the business side of it, but it's also important as we come out of this recovery, sort of recession and difficulties, for the climate side of it, which is also important, climate and energy and those issues. So you know, I mean, I want to play my part in helping the country, basically.
Well, Ed, again, yeah, thanks for coming on. And what I should say, by the way, this is live on Facebook. If you've got any questions, please do ask, and we may vet them first, but we'll then pass them over to Ed. You're currently campaigning on the CBILs loan scheme. You're looking for the government to give 100% guarantee. Things have changed in the last day with the bounce back loans. Where are we? What's going wrong? Why isn't it working?
Well, look, Jonny, I think it is important, this, but it's sort of, in a way, the starting point. The way I kind of think about what I'm concentrating on is mend the loans, extend the grants, and then let's plan for a recovery. And maybe we'll go through those issues from the questions we get. On mending the loans, the problem is that the CBIL system was set up that 80% of the underwriting was guaranteed by government, but 20% was falling on the banks. Now, in normal times, you'd say, well, that's as it should be, the risk is shared and so on. The problem is that the banks were having to make judgments, and I suspect a lot of the people watching this will have had this experience if they applied, of were you viable or profitable on the 31st of December? Were you affected by COVID? And crucially, will you be able to repay the debt? Now, that's such an unknowable thing when we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. We don't know how long lockdown is going to be. So lots of people were being turned away. And frankly, you know, I was just really worried that lots of businesses who really needed help were just not getting the help. So that's why I said underwrite them by 100% for small loans. That will take the risk off the banks, get the money out the door. Now, I'm glad to say that the Chancellor has listened. He's introduced it at least for the first 50,000 of a loan, these bounce back loans, which will come into effect from next Monday. It's not all I wanted, but it's a start. And he's also done something which we've also urged, which is to get rid of the forward-looking credit check, which was this attempt to try and work out going forward whether the business was going to be able to repay it, which I think was leading lots of banks to say no. Now, I'm not saying this is going to sort it completely. We've got to see now, when the new system is in place from next week, does it sort it, or do we need to put even more pressure on the banks? So I'm not saying debt is right for everyone, and we'll come on to grants, but at least some steps have been made to sort out the loans.
Do you have an idea of exactly what this bounce back loan scheme is going to look like at all? I mean, they've not given a huge amount of detail, have they?
Well, from what they've said, it'll be 50 up to 50,000. They're saying it's going to be a very quick, I think he said 24-hour turnaround. It's not going to have this these kind of, you know, quite difficult sort of requirements, forward-looking credit history, and so on. In Switzerland, they've got a system where they do it in 24 hours. They give out 70,000 loans in the first week. In the UK, we gave out, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 loans in the first week, or if that, to be honest. So, you know, we need that simple system, particularly at the lower end. I would like it to have gone higher. I think the other thing to say about this is, and I think this is a cross-party thing, in a crisis like this, the dangers of giving out some loans to businesses that aren't going to survive is massively outweighed by the dangers of not giving out loans to businesses that could survive but aren't going to get the loans if you don't reform the system. That's the way I've thought about it. You know, people are saying, oh, but should the taxpayer be on the hook for 100% and so on? Well, in normal times, no, but in these emergency times, yes.
So although, you know, the government's fully guaranteeing now the bounce back loans and things, a lot of businesses that have applied have been rejected, or ones that have applied have seen varied interest rates from the banks from like 1% to 32%, depending on their perceived level of risk. We're just wondering if, you know, the government is going to ask banks to standardize the interest rates to make it more fair and affordable for people, so it's not going to cripple them coming out of it.
Well, they really should, Nikki, and that has been part of what we've been saying, is these exorbitant interest rates, because interest free for the first 6 months, first 12 months, I beg your pardon. But what I think a number of people are finding is that they then end up in a situation where, yeah, okay, it's interest free for the first 12 months, maybe it should be, but then, you know, they get to face the prospect of getting whacked. And I understand that for lots of businesses, they're worried about the debt, frankly. Yeah. You know, I think it is an important way to tide people over, but I think the government does need to be more prescriptive with the banks on this, definitely.
Yeah, and it's the same issue with the bounce back loans, that we're going to see some varied interest rates, I guess, because ultimately this is a facility that the banks then decide how to fully use. Yes, and look, you're making a good point, and they've just announced, as you said, Jonny, the bounce back loans on Monday. We are going to pursue the precise conditions around it, and you know, I'm going to be noting things in this call, but I definitely take note of this issue, which we have raised before, around the interest rates after that first year, because I think you could see it being a real problem. So I was interested in, you just mentioned that it outweighs giving the loan where there could be a risk to not giving the loan, and I'm interested in that. Of course, we need to worry about how all this is paid back, and that's a bigger issue. But from the small businesses' point of view right now, what you're potentially saying is that, and also what the government is saying is that there could be some easy way to get loans here. But does this then potentially put small businesses in debt, and does it actually solve the problem? And you know, would a grant be far better? Well, then you're taking me on to the second part of what I'm saying, and I think you are right. I mean, we in Britain, I mean, the Chancellor likes to say we've got a very generous package when you compare it to other countries, and I commend the Chancellor for some of his ambitions. Part of the problem, though, is that ours is a very much more loan-based system than systems in other countries. So if you take the US, for example, not everything Donald Trump does is right. You might expect me to say that, but one of the things that one of the things the U.S. Congress has done is said, we'll give you loans, big style. I think it's called the payment protection payment, and it's like our furlough system combined with our loan system. But crucially, if you keep the workers on, it becomes a grant. So in a way, it's a more grant-based system. And you know, of course, there's issues of public money, but I suppose you know what we're trying to do as the opposition, honestly, is not say everything's wrong or ask the impossible. So the government's done this loan system. We were focused on how do you fix it, but I am now focused not just on that, but also let's talk about the people who are missing out on grants. So the people who aren't paying business rates but renting premises, it's a massive problem because the grant's going to the landlord. The government says in a slightly kind of vague way, well, that should be negotiated with the landlord and the tenant and all that, but they don't, you know, that's really, landlords will be under pressure too. So there's businesses, often micro businesses, that are missing out. There's the 51,000 limit in hospitality, retail and leisure. So in other words, above 51,000 rateable value, you don't get a grant. And obviously outside those sectors, business, retail, hospitality and leisure, you don't get a grant either.
that's at least three big gaps in the grant system. Now, money is an object. You can't just say, "Well, spend." Spend. But I do think they've got to look, and this is something we're calling for in the coming days. They've got to look at the real and very, very difficult gaps. Now, by the way, they're not the only gaps. I mean, self-employed will maybe come on to that. That's a big set of gaps. Limited companies, that's a real problem as well. But I think this is particularly true. We don't know what the exit from lockdown is going to look like, but all of the indications from, at least from the newspapers and from what we gather, is it's not going to be a sudden exit. And so for businesses, for some businesses, we're just at the beginning of this kind of stresses they're going to be under. So that's why I think there's going to have to be a second wave of support, which I hope will fill in some of the gaps. We can't just turn off the furlough or say, well, it's going to have to be loans for everybody. We've got to fill in some of the gaps, because crucially it gets our, we've got to get our businesses through this crisis, and we've got to get as many as possible through this crisis, not just for those businesses, but it will make the recession less deep and the recovery easier if those businesses survive.
I just want to run a scenario past you that has been brought up a few times in the group. So, we've got micro business, SMEs, kind of a range of people in there. And just linking back to what you were saying then, a lot of the people in the group are directors that don't pay themselves more than minimum wage. They don't have a physical office. They're like market stall traders. And they're trying to keep costs low and put all the money they can back into the business. But they feel like they are slipping through the net and stuff. So, I mean, is there anything that you could directly say to them now to...
And is this people paying themselves in dividends mainly? Is that the point? Yeah. Look, let's be frank about this. This is a big gap. I mean, this is a big gap, and this is not a sort of party political point, but the Chancellor has sort of said lots of the average income is £200,000. I suspect lots of people in this group would kind of choke on their cornflakes, when they hear that, because they'll think, well, that's not where I am. And I think the truth about this is that there's two different groups here, and we've been trying to get at the figures on this, the detail on this. There's individuals who are kind of at the very high end, but that's a kind of relatively small number who are paying themselves in dividends and so on. And then there's this is anecdotal, so I can't be sure about this, but my guess is from the experiences I've had and the feedback I've had, there are lots and lots and lots of people for whom this was the best way they could manage their affairs, and they've not been told it's wrong or anything, and now suddenly they find, well, what are they supposed to do? They're being offered because they're paying themselves a minimal amount of money in terms of salary. They're just in a really difficult situation, and we have made this point repeatedly to the government. We will continue to make this point. I did a call with Keir Starmer and Annalise Dodds, the Shadow Chancellor, yesterday. This came up a lot. Limited companies, people in this position. So, and they're neither getting, if they're not getting a grant, they're asking quite legitimately, what are we supposed to do? And I've had constituency cases on this too.
Great. It's great to see that, it's a topic that everyone's kind of thinking about, because, it is livelihood, and, people are
definitely
concerned about it, especially in the group that we've got. But many businesses at the minute don't know what the best thing to do right now is. They don't know whether they should be tightening up the purse strings or investing their money back into the business, into marketing, to try boost it out of the other side of it in the recovery. I mean, if you could give businesses one piece of advice around this, what would, hands on a postcard, look into your crystal ball, what would you kind of give them?
Well, look, I want to show due humility, because I think the businesses that you've got in this group are can make better decisions about their business than I can. Look, one thing I would say in this is, the job of MPs at a time like this is to speak up for their constituents. That's generally the job of MPs, obviously, but it's particularly important at a time like this. I take very seriously, not just because I'm the Shadow Business Secretary, even before I was appointed during this crisis, the post bag I get. If you are in difficulty, do contact your local MP. That is what they are there for. And, the more Conservative MPs, Labour MPs, other party MPs that hear this feedback from their constituents saying, this is my situation, you need to tell the Chancellor, you need to tell the government that this is a real problem, this is a crisis, this is a gap, they need to fix it. That does make an impact. And to be fair to the Chancellor, he is listening. I think he is. He's not my political party, but I think that at a time like this, you've got to be working together. He has shown sign of listening, sometimes not as much as I would like, sometimes not as quickly as I would like, but pressure on the politicians, the local MPs, does have an impact because I think the government does recognise the need to act, and so I'm not going to advise people what to do with their businesses, but I do think I do think that pressure can make a difference. And we'll also give you an email address at the end, by the way, for people who can, if people want to get in touch with us with their own cases, because we've got an email address which people can email their own experiences, and we're using that to inform our discussions with government.
You're actively looking for people's stories and people's pains, aren't you?
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that you're doing these campaigns. Is it how easy is it to influence? You've been in this a long time. How easy is it to influence?
Well, look, honestly, Jonny, there are days when I get up and I think, the government's not moving. So on the 100% CBILs thing, for a while, for a couple of weeks after I called for it, it looked like the government just wasn't moving. And the Chancellor kind of pretty much closed the door. He opened the door and then he closed the door. And I just thought, well, this is, and I talked to the business organizations, the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, we're in constant touch. And I'm saying, well, what are we going to do to move him? And then he did move a bit. So, it's sort of, I think pressure can make a difference, and I think it's particularly important at this moment for me to be working across party. I won't sort of name them because it might it's a bit of a curse. But I mean, now there's Conservative MPs I'm in touch with, and talking to, and people I've got to know over the years that I've worked with in the past when I've been a backbencher, who I get on well with, some quite senior backbenchers, and I'm in touch with them saying, look, how are we going to move this thing along? I'm really worried about this. What do you think? Because I think that's the only way to do this. The more cross-party you can be, the more non-yaboo you can be, in terms of just shouting the odds, the more reasonable you can be, the better it is, I think.
Just taking you back to you're talking about directors, and we were talking about that gap. So what I'm hearing, and I'm wondering if you're hearing the same, that with the furlough scheme and with small businesses, single directors aren't paying normally dividend. They could furlough themselves, but then obviously it's a very small amount of money they could get. But the other issue is they're not meant to actually be working whilst they're furloughing. So we were aware that Ed had to take a call. I think he's just taken that call. Correct me if I'm wrong. We were fully aware. I'm just going to mute him just in case. I've just muted him. Hopefully you can't hear him.
He forewarned us that he'd have to take an urgent call during this. So don't worry.
I guess we're only so important. If you do have questions, please do ask. And I hope you're enjoying watching. It would be good to know. I'm about to ask him about the furlough and directors. Nikki, you enjoying interviewing Ed? Yeah,
it's good. I don't think I've messed up too much so far.
You've done very well indeed. It's absolutely brilliant. We're as we've said, we are interested in what you'd like to ask. If you do have questions, I know you've already given us questions, but as you're watching, if you've got other things you want to ask, please do ask. It would be great. Anything else we want to talk about in the group, Nikki? What's going on? We've got we've got another live Q&A this afternoon. You've got a live Q&A coming up, haven't you?
I do, yeah. From the Leeds, kind of Leeds-based support, the Leeds micro business support. I'm going to be doing a live with Sarah in a couple of weeks. So yes, that should be good. There's loads going on, to be honest, and it's just, yeah, it's busy, isn't it? But it's really good.
So this afternoon we've got a Nigel Cliff joining us at 4:00 to do a live Q&A on LinkedIn. Now I did a link pimp your LinkedIn profile with Leeds Digital Festival last week. You'll find the webinar on my channel, but what's interesting this afternoon is Nigel has quite a different take on some of this. And so it'll be interesting to get some of his viewpoints on how best you could be using LinkedIn. It's amazing that I've managed to get him because this obviously is on Facebook. We have a Facebook group, and he's a total admits it. Facebook Luddite, hates Facebook. Totally sticks with LinkedIn. We Nikki, when we first set this up, we were debating on whether to do a LinkedIn or a Facebook group, weren't we?
I was dubious
rightly,
about Facebook,
you rightly were dubious about Facebook, and you rightly wanted to look at LinkedIn. And to be fair, that is the business platform, isn't it? And you know, and Facebook tends to be the more sort of what I had for dinner, etc., etc. So what we decided was we thought, well, we'll test it. So we set up the Facebook group and we set up the LinkedIn group on the same day. About a week later, was it fairly obvious?
Yeah, just a little bit. I'm one for kind of keeping business separate from my Facebook. And a lot of people, if I do have contacts on there, they're like really heavily restricted in what they can see, because usually I just post a lot of cat pictures. But yeah, I've been surprised actually. Yeah, it's opened my eyes a little bit in terms of.
Yeah, we've had so much more engagement on Facebook. There's still the LinkedIn group. There's still a couple of comments in there, but nothing of interest, really. Nothing of too much interest, really. What's also worth mentioning is that we're aware that there's people in the group that are, you know, with lockdown, they could be quite lonely at home. So we've talked a lot about mental health. We had Harry Bliss from Champion Health doing a talk about and resources available, things that you can do, but we're fully aware that there are still people in the group that, you know, don't necessarily have family members at home, you know, are finding this quite, you know, this quite isolating. So there was an idea floating around doing some additional Zoom calls, but making them sort of no work talk. So I think the first one is tonight at 8:30. I'm not sure if Nikki knows the exact detail. I think it's tonight around then. So you could have a look at that, and the timing of that will change. The idea is that it'll change, you know, be random, so that it tries to fit as many people as possible. So that's something else that you could look at. And
8:30, I've just double checked.
8:30, brilliant. Excellent. And we're also thinking about you know, how we can develop this group with regard to taking it forward from a recovery point of view. So we've managed to survive. We've managed to you know, look at whether, well, sorry, some of us are still surviving. I fully get that, but we've considered the survival part. We're now either hibernating or we're you know, taking opportunities. But what me and Nikki are thinking about is how we can support you all in having a really strong recovery. And what you'll see is that both of us have been adding some resources over the last few days. But what we'd again love to know, you know, feedback is a wonderful thing. The more we can hear from you on the sort of things that you're wanting help with, or the directions that you want to us to take you, or to get advice, please do ask. So that would be something that we'd really value hearing back from you.
Definitely. I've just logged on the Facebook feed because I can't see live comments, but there's a couple of people just asking where we want the comments posted and the questions posted. If you can pop it on the live post just under there.
So there should be, the video that you're watching should be where you can comment. But I know there have been quite a few posts about this interview this morning, so it could be that you're using some of the other posts to comment on. Yeah, theory. It's the one that's pinned at the top of the group chat. It's obviously still.
Yeah, I can see the comments, Rachel. It was just well, I can't see them. Jonny can see them, but I've got the feed up separately. That was all. So yeah, if you want to comment on where you are now, we can see.
I can't see a comment from Rachel.
Ah, weird technology.
Nikki? Can you see the comment inside StreamYard?
No, I can see the comment on the Facebook groups. I put it
right. Fair enough.
So.
Fair enough. It would be it would be good for you to add comments in the into this chat if you can. Anything else that we wanted to mention that's coming up? Any other initiatives that we're going to try and achieve? We're in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just waiting for you to do a sing and dance while we're waiting. You're the entertainment in the middle of the segment.
It may have to resort to that. I'm not sure. I could bring a couple of Ed's colleagues in who are secretly listening. I could put them on the spot, but maybe not. That would be very unfair.
No, it'd be
I could do a song and dance, although I think we'd put people off quite seriously, to be perfectly honest. Yeah. And how are you finding it working from home, Nikki?
At Virtual DCS, we're we're geared up to work from anywhere. The joys of being cloud computing company, as we're all set up. So we're basically using Teams and Zoom and a mix of other bits and bobs to do it. But yeah, I don't really feel like I've missed much out really. If anything, I've probably been more productive because well, actually, don't tell them that, because I would like some social interaction. But
I wonder if your boss is watching.
probably that, or his wife will be. So I have to be careful. But no, it's been interesting. I don't think we've seen any kind of big learning curve or anything from it. So
the thing that strikes me is that businesses like yourself, tech businesses, digital businesses, businesses that have adopted digital are doing okay right now. Or I don't mean okay is quite broad, but what I mean is that that, like you've said, working from home feels normal, and you're used to the tech, you're used to dialing in, etc. My concern is there's a lot of businesses, and in this group that that I've heard from, that are hibernating because they don't fully understand the tech. They don't fully they're not fully au fait with it, and they're in a way, I don't want to be what's the word, condescending by any means, but I can't think of a better word, so I'm just going to have to use it. But don't take me the wrong way. Ed's back. Brilliant. I've been saved by the bell anyway. Let's put Ed's mic back on.
I am incredibly sorry about that.
Don't worry at all. You pre-warned us, and I'm so glad you came back, because I nearly had to do a song and dance. So
we're all waiting.
Can you hear us or not, Ed? You can't hear us. Ed, no. If you want to, he's going to rejoin the rejoin. Yeah, we told him that earlier.
Difficulties.
God, I'm still going to have to do that song and dance. But yeah, I mean, what I was basically saying was that it concerns me that some businesses are just literally thinking that lockdown's just going to come soon and everything will go back to normal. And I'm amazed. I really am. It worries me when I hear people talking like that. I did a poll of a vote in a webinar, and I think 20% of people watching genuinely thought that things were just going to go back to normal in a short period of time, and that was just, for me, it was personally quite frightening. Ed, can you hear us now?
Yeah, I want to apologise, Jonny and Nikki, to you and the other viewers. I maybe you explained I had a family medical issue I just had to attend to, and I did warn you in advance. I really apologise, and I hope it didn't seem discourteous.
No,
You totally did, and we fully understand, and we're all working from home, and it's just the way it is, isn't it? I mean, you know, my children haven't been in the room yet, but
all right, I'm waiting for the cat to come crawl over me or something.
It's just, you know, the doctors are under sort of pressure, so I had to take this call. So I do apologise.
Honestly, we fully understand.
Let's keep going.
So Nikki, where were we?
Oh gosh, I can't remember now. We'll wait.
Right,
I think we were talking about grants. I think we were talking about the gap, the grants issue and the gaps there were. And you were rightly asking about limited companies and dividends.
And
then we
one of the questions
about MPs and pressure.
One of the questions that I had was around so where I was going with this was director, small business. They have a choice. They normally get paid through dividend because they pay themselves a lower wage. They could furlough, which therefore gives them a small amount. I must say, by the way, before I fully ask the question, when I found myself falling into this gap, I came out and said, do you know what? We've chosen as a business to have this model. We pay slightly lower tax because of this model. It's a tax efficient model. So do we not just need to take the rough with the smooth? And, you know, I personally think that, you know, we do have some benefits. So that's a short question there, Ed, before I've come on to my main question.
I mean, like, you know, in normal times, I would say people have to take the rough with the smooth. But, you know, it's a sort of, it's interesting this, when I argue that the government should look at this area and try and do something about it, I'm not just doing it for your benefit or the benefit of other people on this call. I'm doing this for the benefit of all of us. Because if we don't support those businesses through these difficult times, and if those businesses go under and they and their employees have to claim benefits, or, you know, that economic activity ceases, we're all going to end up paying for it. So I think it's a balance. It's not saying government can do everything. I sort of recognize that, and I think it's important that we're not just the people saying government's got to do everything. But, you know, I do sort of think, you know, it's sort of, it's in our collective benefit to try and plug these gaps, at least some of these gaps.
Yeah. So the question that I was going to come on to is some businesses, you know, perhaps can't be open right now, can't be serving clients because of the situations and social isolation, etc. You know, take a chiropractor, unable to see patients, a hairdresser, perhaps they don't have a situation where they can get a grant for rates, etc. But my question is around furlough. So with regard to, you know, they have a choice. They could furlough themselves. Ed's just giving us a tour of the house, which is very kind.
I am, yeah.
So they could furlough themselves, which gives them a small amount of income. But my concern and my question, and I don't know if you can give any advice here, is does that then mean they can't do any type of marketing for their business at all? They can't do any, you know, they're frightened about putting a social media post out because officially they're furloughed. And there's just that such a grey area where there's not been any official advice. And, you know, I've got some opinion on it, but
I can't believe people are, I mean, look, I don't want to speak out of turn here. And it's, again, one of the things I can check, but I can't believe that people can't do social media posts. I mean, who's going to, I mean, you know, that doesn't seem.
Ed, is that feedback you've heard or not? Because trust me.
Well, I tell you what, Jonny. Let me go and check. I'm making a note. And
no, sorry,
I
didn't.
Yeah.
No. I didn't mean is that the correct advice? What I meant was, have you had people ask that question to you? Because we've had a lot of people.
Well, I tell you what. I think it's part of a bigger picture question, which is, I think the thing we need to be arguing for is flexible furlough.
Yeah.
Because at the moment we have inflexible furlough. I mean, that's not meant as a critique of the government, because the furlough scheme is a good scheme, but it's too inflexible. The 3-week thing, some of the stuff you're talking about, we've got to have more. Obviously, the government doesn't want to be paying people to not be working and then them to be working. You can see the sort of that point of view, but there needs to be greater flexibility, particularly as we exit from lockdown, because if exit from lockdown is a bit stop-start, is a bit phased, you're going to need more flexibility in the system. And it's tough for the Chancellor because they're trying to, it's a sort of big old kind of, £800 gorilla, the HMRC and the whole systems. So it's quite hard to, probably to build in all these tweaks into the system. But I think there needs to be more flexibility.
Yeah.
One other thing that we've been seeing as well through members of the group is that they're having issues with kind of business insurance and things. So obviously nobody predicted that anything like this was going to happen. So when they've gone to discuss, their insurance policies and things, they've discovered that a loss of profit clause isn't included.
Yes.
Are there any plans for putting pressure on the government to help businesses in this situation? Because it's a safety net, again, that's kind of being pulled out from under their feet.
Well, I do know, I think there's a group, isn't there, that's taking an action against one of the insurers on this issue. I mean, I think it's interesting, this, Nikki. I think that one of the places we're going to be having to move our focus is onto these questions of how third parties are treating the SME sector. So the insurance industry is one thing, around these clauses that you're raising. Banks, large businesses, are they paying on time? That's always an issue, but it could become much more of an issue as those large businesses are under stress. They're sort of in a way passing on their distress to smaller to SMEs that can least afford it. So yeah, we're on this thing on the insurance issue. I think there is a real question there, because some of the policies were clearly not designed for a pandemic. Some of them are ambiguous, and of course, as always with the insurance industry, they're interpreting the ambiguity in favor of them. And we need to get every business that has a chance of having been covered. They need to get help.
Yeah.
Well, oh, sorry, Nikki. Go
ahead.
Okay. So big news yesterday about British Airways, 12,000 jobs. Should the government be bailing out? What should? Any thoughts on that, Ed? I mean, it's really sad news. Isn't it?
It is sad news, and I'm really sorry for those workers. It's a tough one, this, because there's general support across the sector, and I think I'm right in saying that British Airways is benefiting from the furlough for I think it's some 20,000 of its employees. So there's general support.
I was wondering why couldn't they put them on furlough anyway? That was my initial thought, actually.
Well, I think there are some questions to raise, definitely, which we will raise around that. I mean, look, my general view, Jonny, on this question of bailouts beyond the generality is if we're going to be giving public money over and above the general support, particularly to large firms, it's got to be a bit of a two-way street. I think everybody thinks the problem in 2008 was that while the government, the Labour government, took some action that was right, there wasn't enough of a deal with the banks. The banks got bailed out, but they didn't necessarily change their behaviour as they should have done. And, I suppose what I would be looking for on these I wouldn't say we should never bail anyone out over and above the generality, because there are some businesses that you're going to want to keep going and you want to save those workers' jobs. But companies shouldn't be paying dividends while getting bailouts from the government. They shouldn't be engaging in things like sort of share buybacks, and they should be offering some guarantees in relation to their employees, as well as a set of other objectives that government might want. So I think the general principle is not to say no to bailouts. There are some really important British firms that could do with extra help that are big household names, but there's got to be some sense of a deal and a two-way street on this. On British Airways specifically, I think I'd like to know more about the exact situation here. Why didn't they furlough more of these employees? When are these redundancies going to strike? It may well be right that the airline industry, what British Airways have said is the airline industry is going to take a long time to recover. And that may well be right. I really feel for those workers. I think the other point I would make is, and this is going to be so important, and it's been important previously, but it's going to be even more important now. What is the safety net what is the safety net and the future opportunities for workers who are made redundant? Because we know that there are we're already seeing redundancies, significant redundancies. How are those workers going to be supported? I think lots of people have, seen the universal credit system and thought, it's a system they've heard about, and they're thinking, I've paid my taxes. This is just not giving me the support. I feel like I feel like I've paid in a lot and I'm getting very little out. So what is the strength of the safety net? And I think it is going to need to be improved in the future. What future opportunities are we offering for workers? I'll just give you an example, because it's an area we sort of touched on at the start, the green industry, the green area. We have a massive job to be done in changing, just to give one example, the way households heat their homes and are insulated in the next 10 years. If we're going to get to this zero emissions, this net zero, which is the thing people talk about, zero emissions, we're going to have to revolutionize the way we operate as a country. There's so much work to be done in this area, and it is absolutely necessary to be done. And so partly, I suppose, what I think is in the 1930s in America, there was a president called President Franklin Roosevelt, and he saw the Great Depression, and he basically said, okay, I'm not going to leave people idle. I'm going to put them back to work to do useful things for the country. And I'd say we've got to have that sort of mindset. We don't want people who are made redundant shouldn't be just sort of left to one side. We know in Yorkshire what happens when you have a sudden economic shock in the mining industry and people aren't properly, and again, I'm not trying to make a political point, but people aren't, I think people of all stripes would say, well, that wasn't really very well handled. That economic change wasn't managed properly. You've got to manage economic change and share the risk with individuals and help those individuals to find new work. So I think that's kind of my view about it. You can't stop every redundancy. We should, government. If I was in government, I'd be having hard discussions with British Airways about their furloughing, about the 22,000 they've furloughed. What's the story with these 12,000? But if those people are going to be made redundant, they've got to be helped in the future.
Forgive me if I keep seeming to be looking at this direction.
Don't worry.
I've got comments on another screen. So
yeah. Please keep going. And by the way, if you, Nikki and Jonny, if you want a bit more time, since I had that 10 minutes out, if you want to carry on a bit longer, and if there's a demand for it, I'm very happy to carry on.
Perfect.
That's very kind.
Thank you very much.
The job of politicians is to disrupt their diaries and leave the people who work for them with their heads in their hands, saying, "Why has he done that? He's supposed to be speaking to someone else at 11 o'clock." But anyway, that's kind of my role in life,
Keep them on the toes.
Exactly.
So one thing that I keep seeing popping up in the corner of my screen is that, we're in this crisis, we're going through it the best we can, but what happens at the other side? So, we're getting all this money, seemingly, the country's going to be a little bit further in debt, but, how does everybody pay it back? And, what does it mean for the economy and for the businesses? How long is it going to take us to recover from this? Any ideas?
These are really good questions. I mean, these are really good questions. I think the correct comparison is not with the financial crisis of 2008, because the financial crisis of 2008 was a shock to the banks that sent shockwaves through the economy, but it wasn't a kind of closing down of 1/3 of our economy, which is more or less what we've had. A closing down of 1/3 and an effect on the whole economy, which is what we've had this time. I think the correct comparison is with the Second World War, actually, and in a way, Boris Johnson has described it as a war. And therefore, we are going to have significantly bigger debts. We're not going to be able to pay them all off at once. We can't have, in my view, and Conservative members of Parliament said this to me as well, we can't have what we had between 2010 and 2015. I'm not trying to rehearse those arguments, but if at this moment we just engage in a whole round of cuts, it's going to be even worse for the economy, because we need our economy to recover. And we're going to find that businesses have got debt, workers have lost their jobs. Actually, we're going to have a real problem of demand in the economy. So we're going to have to find a way of keeping this debt under control, but it's going to have to be done over time. We're going to have to recognize that the debt's going to go up, and the best, in the end, the only ways you can deal with your debts is raising taxes, cutting spending, or crucially growing the economy. If you grow the economy and more people are paying taxes and fewer people are on benefits, that's the best way of keeping your debts under control. And I really would emphasize that third issue. The reason I talk about useful activity that people can do, like in the green industries, is we've got to get this economy going. And we might have to find ways of getting this economy going in a way that is consistent with our public health measures. They're going to be, let's be honest, there are going to be some industries where lots of people congregate in one place, which will probably take longer to reopen. And then there are going to be other jobs where you can apply social distancing, you can have protective equipment, and that's a whole other story. And it's going to be easier. So we are going to have to pay this off over time, or at least keep it under control. At the moment, we in long-term interest rates, which is the way you judge how creditworthy a government is. In other words, how much of the financial market saying they're going to have to be paid to take on government debt. At the moment, they remain pretty low in the UK and actually elsewhere. So there isn't a sort of sign of alarm in the financial markets around this. That we're a country with massive resources and a big asset base. So I think we've got to keep an eye on that debt question, but we mustn't have it kind of inhibit our economic recovery.
You brought up green a bit earlier and climate change. I mean, this year was meant to be a big year for climate change. You got COP26 towards the end of the year. How is coronavirus going to impact this? I mean, did we learn anything in 2008? Could we talk to us about the green stimulus?
Yes. So that's a really important point, Jonny. I mean, COP26 has been postponed rightly, in my view, because, frankly, countries are not focused on this at the moment. And anyway, they can't, you can't travel, and it's just the whole thing is a sort of impossibility. So that's going to be next year, and I think that's the right decision. And just for people who don't know, that's the world coming together. There was a big agreement in Paris in 2015 to agree the climate targets. But the problem is that the targets weren't strong enough. It's the world's coming together in 2020, now 2021, to say how do they need to be updated and upgraded. But there's a big obligation on us now to say, how do we recover in a green way? And I mentioned there's lots of work that can be done. There's work in households. I mentioned the way households are heated, insulation, all that. Great thing about insulation, by the way, is you can cut people's bills, save on carbon emissions, and create jobs. So it's a win-win. There's other things, we need the car industry to keep going. Moving to electric vehicles, that's a big thing. There's rewilding. In Doncaster, I'm chairing for the council a climate change commission looking at some of these climate questions about how you can create employment. There's rewilding, again, potential role for farmers, potential role for land around those issues. Renewable energy, installing wind power, solar power. So there's a lot we can do. Looking back at 2008, I think you mentioned that about 16% of the money spent on recovery, so-called stimulus, was on green measures. That was sort of across the industrialized world, and actually it so happened it was about 16% in the UK. But some countries did a lot better. South Korea, 80% of its stimulus was judged to be green. They did better than us. So what I would aspire to do is to say, let's do that. Let's not just do that for the climate. People will be worried about that issue, but they've got other things which are very pressing for them. But let's do it for jobs and employment as well.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because one of the things that we're talking to businesses about is how to come out of this with strong recovery, and of course, not all of this is just about finance and having money in the bank. It's also about being relevant, and it's about taking opportunity. It's about differentiating. And my thought process is that I wonder if consumer behaviour will change. There'll be a significant impact on consumer behaviour with regard to caring. This whole clapping on a Thursday night. There's a lot of caring going on. And I wonder if businesses need to hear this message that actually green is an opportunity.
Definitely. And look, the clap for carers has been an amazing thing. I mean, I suppose the thing I always think when I'm doing it with my kids is, you know, we should be doing this. We can't. We shouldn't stop when the. I mean, first of all, we've got to reward the carers properly in terms of their, because I think just clapping them is important, but they've also got to be properly rewarded. I think we've had a real recognition of what essential work looks like in this crisis, and how poorly remunerated lots of people are in that essential work. But I mean, it is an amazing. I completely agree with you. It's an amazing thing, and I think the other thing is air pollution is a massive problem for our country. Now, nobody would have wanted it to take a coronavirus crisis to cut down on air pollution, but we've also got to learn some lessons from this crisis about. I actually think we'll probably learn lessons about, notwithstanding sort of Zoom disasters, the fact that we can have meetings we don't have to drive to see somebody to go and have a meeting. It would never have, you're probably, I think you're both significantly younger than me, so this was probably always in your minds anyway, but it would never have occurred to me to say, instead of having a meeting with somebody, I'll do it by Zoom or one of the other, or Skype or FaceTime or whatever. But I think now I will think, well, does that person really need to come to my office? Do I really need to go to their office? Can I just talk to them on one of those platforms? So and in that change, you're seeing probably sometimes greater efficiency, not always. Sometimes Zoom meetings can be longer than actual meetings, but also. You're saving on pollution, saving on some of those journey times, probably. So I think there are lessons we can learn from this. I don't know whether you saw this. There's this extraordinary picture of a jellyfish swimming in Venice through the waters, and the waters were just totally pristine clear. I've never actually been to Venice myself, but a
wonderful place.
Yeah, and presumably it's all that pollution of all the tourism. Now, obviously, Venice needs tourism, but I think I don't think you need to be necessarily a green in inverted commas to recognise that there are just lessons for us about the way we sort of live our lives in this.
I think there's definitely a newfound respect for key workers that people wouldn't necessarily have deemed essential. People, people that work in shops, things like that. There's definitely a newfound respect, and just because businesses are having to adapt so quickly themselves as well. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier that you do more video calls and things like that. So, as an MP, how else have you adapted, during this time to home working? Are you going stir crazy like everyone else is staying inside?
I mean, it's definitely. I always respected my kids' teachers, but I respect them even more now. I mean, it's interesting. I think part of the challenge, and I suspect anyone with kids will feel this, is. Well, there's challenges at both ends of the generations. I think there's challenges of making your kids feel secure, and I'm quite conscious about not exposing them to quite how awful this has been for so many people, because I think if you constantly got the news on and they're constantly hearing that, I do think it's quite emotionally destabilizing for kids. My older son is in year 6. It means he was quite upset when school was suspended, because he was worried he wasn't going to ever see his friends again before he left primary school. So there's quite a lot of quite difficult emotional issues, as well as the ones that we're all coping with. And then for older generations, I've got an elderly mother. It's pretty tough for her. I communicate with her through Skype or FaceTime, but I'm not able to see her. And so I suppose we're all kind of coping in terms of the way we work. I'm doing surgeries. In fact, I've got one tomorrow. MPs do these things called surgeries. I'm just doing it by phone. That's sort of, it's okay. I mean, I think we need to adapt, and we need to learn some lessons, but there's no substitute for. Well, there can be substitutes for in person, but I think in person still matters, if you know what I mean. I wouldn't fancy doing this permanently, trying to sort of conduct your business just in this way.
Yeah, I was listening to your one of your latest podcasts this morning, and I think you've got a new dog. Did you say, Chutney?
Oh gosh, you're gonna out me, my fictional dog. So we don't have a dog, basically. And my wife, and this is maybe as a sign of sort of what happens to you when you're in lockdown. My wife said, "I know a really nice dog's name is Chutney. Let's just create a fictional dog, Chutney, because it's got all the advantages of having a dog, which is, you kind of, well, it probably doesn't, but I mean, you can imagine the advantage of having a dog without some of the obligations." So I was saying, I was saying that on the podcast, we're sitting eating a meal in the evening, and I'll say, "Oh, Chutney down," and my kids will look at me as if I've really, lost it. Yeah, maybe we'll end up with a dog. We're still trying to work out what breed our fictional dog is.
I think lockdown is sending you a bit loopy. I just want to go back to furlough, if that's all right, just for a minute. So you talked about it. It needs to be more flexible. I was just wondering about your views and what exactly you'd try to get changed. What could be? What do you think it could look better? How do you think it could look better?
Well, this is sort of the lead in this is our treasury team, but my understanding of it is that you've got these 3-week cycles of it, and therefore you sort of got to switch people on or switch people off for at least a period of 3 weeks. And what businesses have said to me is, look, that it doesn't give us enough flexibility. Sure, we can furlough some workers, but not others. But we might need people, for example, to work less. I mean, a lot of people are working less, and those people are not being covered if their salaries are falling significantly, many fewer hours. So, I'm aware, as I said earlier, of the technical constraints in this, but I would appeal for more flexibility in the way the system in the way the system operates. Listening to what businesses are saying about the additional flexibility they will need, particularly as we come out of lockdown, and that flexibility will be more necessary. Now, look, if you're in the Chancellor's shoes, for the reasons that Nikki talked about earlier, and the debt question, you're going to be thinking, I need these schemes turned off as quickly as possible. But I think Rishi Sunak did say in the House of Commons on Monday that he recognised that it might need to taper away, and so, the more the government can introduce greater flexibility, the better it will be, I think.
It is about the flexibility. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. It's about being able to bring staff in for shorter periods of time. So it might be, getting them to work 50% of the time that they normally work, or 20% of the time, or
exactly.
And also, as we come out of lockdown, which we is not going to just be black and white, and it does worry me that some businesses do think it's going to be black and white. But as we come out of lockdown, we're going to need that flexibility to slowly but surely bring sales back in and bring staff back in.
Exactly, and look, in my mind, also is once we've been saying to the government, please do publish an exit strategy as soon as possible. We've really got to put our arm around those businesses that are going to be further to the back of the queue in terms of reopening, because it's one thing for the businesses that are able to reopen, but if it's the case, and I don't have inside information on this, so I'm not sort of making an announcement, but if it's the case that the hospitality industry has got to be further to the back of the queue, we can't just say, I said right at the beginning of this crisis, when Matt Hancock, the health secretary, announced the public health measures, I got up in the House of Commons and said, look, extraordinary public health measures have got to be accompanied by extraordinary economic measures supporting the businesses concerned. This was before I was in this job, and I kind of I continue to feel that, and I think the government's ambitions on this are good. It's our job to kind of close the gap between the ambition and the reality.
We're going to wrap this up very shortly. I just had I can't not ask this question, but I'm really curious on how different you think Labour is going to be under Sir Keir Starmer, and where you think things are going to go.
Well, look, I think he's made an excellent start. I think other voters will be the judge of this, but I think what he's tried to do is show that we can be the opposition, which is our job, but we can be constructive. We can ask searching questions. I'm sure he'll do that in the House of Commons today, Prime Minister's questions, but do it in a way that is clearly constructive and mature. I think for any leader, when a party's lost a general election as badly as we did in 2019 at the end of last year, you're going to have a process of rebuilding. I'm happy to be part of his team. I think he recognises that Labour's got to be unified in order to show that we can, have an aspiration of leading the country. So I think he's doing well. Voters will be the judge. But it's I think at this moment, Jonny, if I'm honest, I sort of think, even less than normal. I think the issue is less how is any political party doing. I think the issue is much more how do we come together as a country. I think, I think in a way, I was leader of the opposition. I had to do all that Yahoo stuff in House of Commons. Most people think I wasn't that good at it. Maybe I wasn't. I think if we could get to a politics that was less finger pointing, point scoring, I think it would be a lot better. And if we've modelled, I was saying earlier, we've got to learn lessons from this crisis. If we've modelled that a bit in this crisis, maybe we can have a bit more of that. I think it's one thing to say there will be competing visions about, going back to the questions you and Nikki have asked about how do we recover as a country, how do we distribute the burden if taxes have to go up, how do we distribute the burden between the richest and everyone else. So those questions may divide parties. How much should government be spending, where should it be spending the money? So those things will divide parties, but maybe we can do it in a slightly more in a kind of less hateful way, I suppose. Because I think politics became, after I stopped being leader and then with the Brexit referendum and so on, politics became incredibly hateful on all sides. And this crisis has dialed down that volume a lot. And I hope it doesn't dial just back up again, if I'm frank, because I that's not sort of what I'm in politics for, really.
Yeah, and we had a question on that, but we're going to avoid it. So lastly, a couple of silly quick questions.
Go on.
I've got one.
Yeah.
Are you still a big Leeds United supporter? Or are we? We're in Leeds right now.
I'm a bit of a lapsed Leeds United supporter, in truth. I'm a little.
So no opinion on whether they're going to go back up.
I'm a little. Well, goodness knows whether this season restarts and when it restarts. I'm a bit more lapsed than I should be, actually. My children are sort of pulling me in different directions. I think they're still trying to work out who exactly they support.
Nikki's got one for you.
So I'm asking this because I wouldn't be forgiven if I didn't ask this question. We've got a lot of runners in the group, surprisingly. No, I'm not one of them personally, but you apparently attend a lot of park runs.
Yes, I do, including one in Cosworth Hall in Doncaster.
Yeah, the question was, what's your favourite one that you've done, and
I would say this maybe. I really love the one in Cosworth Hall. I don't know whether you know Cosworth Hall, but it's just a fantastic place to have a park run. It's got a lake. It's got like fantastic grounds. There's Sandal Park, so I don't want to do down Sandal Park, which is not in my constituency, but that's good too. I do really miss Park Run, and it's obvious the reasons for it not taking place. We interviewed actually for my podcast Paul Sinton Hewitt, the founder of Park Run, a couple of weeks ago, and he's just an amazing guy. It started with, maybe there's a lesson in this. It started with 12 of his friends, I think, in 2004. And it's now millions of people across the world. That's just an extraordinary achievement. And the interesting thing about Park Run, for those who do it, this will strike a chord with them. People think it's about running, and it obviously is about running, but it's about so much more than that. It's about the social life you get out of it, meeting other people, feeling part of something bigger than yourself. And maybe there is a wider lesson in that, I think. I do think this crisis has happened in Britain in the past, obviously not in our lifetime. Because we'll shortly be remembering VE Day, 75 years since VE Day, and I think you get a sense of what it was like in the Second World War. I think you get a little insight into the fact that neighbors talk to each other more, maybe in a socially distant way. People look after each other more. I saw it in my constituency, by the way, in the floods of last year. The amazing community coming together, and we're at our best definitely as a country when we're in a crisis. Maybe we need to reproduce more the spirit of the crisis outside the crisis, and I think something like Parkrun is a small but quite significant example of that.
Absolutely. Ed, it's been amazing that you've come on. What's great to see is how accessible you are. You want to get across an email address, don't you? Have you got that?
Yes, I do. business@labour.org.uk.
Business@labour.org.uk.
Business@labour.org.uk. There's a couple of things I'd say about that. Please do send us on your experiences, good and bad. If you're having a good experience, we'd like to hear about it. Bad experience too. I will look at every case that comes into the email box, because that's what I've been doing, because it will help inform the next stages of what we argue for. The only kind of caveat I'd say is, in terms of taking up your case, in other words, personally trying to intervene, do go to your MP. Just one of the things is that, maybe this isn't widely known, UK Finance, that runs the banks, they have a way in which MPs can take cases around the loan scheme directly to them. So it's like a sort of, a kind of system for taking that case. So if you've had like a bad loans experience, for example, do go to your local MP. If you had if you're falling through the cracks on grants, or that if you're worried about the dividends issue or other issues, insurance, do also go to your MP. But it is worth, whatever party your MP is, it is really worth doing that. But also do send us your experiences as well.
It's brilliant how accessible you are, and it's fabulous to see that you're campaigning for businesses. You've got
maybe I can make a suggestion, particularly given my unfortunate absence in the middle. Maybe we can do this again in a couple of months' time, because I think implicit in this is it's not going to be over quickly, and as a sounding board for what you're hearing as this is going on, it will be really good to keep in touch and do it again.
Would be absolutely delighted to have you back. Thank you.
It's
been brilliant. Just to remind everyone, we are on Facebook with the Coronavirus Yorkshire Business Support Group. It's been fabulous to have Ed here today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Lastly, Ed, your podcast, which we both like, The Reasons to Be Cheerful. What's your reason to be cheerful today? Just to put you on the spot.
What is my reason to be cheerful today?
You put you on the spot.
Gosh, I'm sort of racking. I'm racking my brains. Both of you. How's that for a crawling answer?
Fabulous.
Love it.
Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll do another live Q&A. There's one at 4:00 this afternoon on LinkedIn. We've got another one coming up next week with Leeds City Council on micro businesses, and you've all been a delight. We shall see you soon. It's bye from me. Ed, say if you want to say goodbye.
Bye from me.
And Nikki.
Bye.
Thanks so much.